Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
Okay, Stephen's name going to go down in history for all sorts of things, and I just think, okay, that's a positive, but I'd rather have my son here than having his name attached to a legacy.
Greetings, Justice and Gus T Renegade in for another program, the C.O.W.S, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of racism. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the broadcast. I hope it is a constructive investment of your time. Today's date, Monday, March 12th, 2012. Before we get started, I'd just like to take a few moments to recognize victim of racism, black male, Mr. Trayvon Lawrence. Again, the C.O.W.S. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the broadcast. The program today, it is a pleasure, an honor, really, to have her back with us. She was on the program in February of 2011, and we discussed what happened to Trayvon Lawrence, her son, who was violently murdered in April of 1993 by a gang of racist white males. And for more than 18 years, no one was charged, no one was put in jail. Just a really ugly example of racism, and in my view, a system of racism where it's not just these 5 males who committed this act, but a larger system in place that can allow for this sort of thing to happen and go unpunished. This is an example of persistence, I guess, for today's program and her family, entire network of people who were dedicated to their son, dedicated to the pursuit of justice and combating racism in the United Kingdom. They had a trial conviction earlier this year, 2012, where 2 of the white men who participated in this racist murder were convicted, and real pleasure to have her back on the program to discuss her thoughts on what happened with the trial and her continued effort to pursue justice. She's written a book about what happened in this case, and Still I Rise. As I said, just an extreme honor to have her back on the broadcast with us. Joining us live from the United Kingdom, Mrs. Doreen Lawrence. Mrs. Lawrence, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And good evening to everyone. Well, it's evening for me. I presume it's afternoon for you over there in the States.
Yes, ma'am. It's a little bit afternoon, but yeah, just as I said, I'm just thrilled to death to have you back on the program, and thank you for sharing a bit of your time with us for you this evening. To begin, for folks who maybe in the States didn't follow, again, the trial, just the early part of 2012, where Gary Dobson and David Norris, 2 of the racist white men who murdered your child, they were convicted 14 and 15 years respectively. In the aftermath of the conviction, you gave an interview and you said that this is not a cause for celebration. And I thought that was extremely important. Can you share with our listeners why this is not a cause for celebration?
Because it's taken so long, 18.5 years to get to this position. And also that it's only a partial justice. Because out of the 5, we've only managed to get conviction for 2. Also, I think the fact that Stephen had deserved better than what the British justice system had laid out for him. And so I didn't feel I could really celebrate, because by celebrating, you're celebrating as something really fantastic. Yes, the party got partial justice, but as I said, I'd rather have my son than having to go through all the turmoil that I've gone through in the past 18 and a half years.
Absolutely. Just following what has happened with the case, and this just came out within the last couple of days, the report, Lawrence family calls for inquiry into police corruption. And I'll just read a little bit and get you to share your thoughts. The report. It states, last week, a leaked Scotland Yard report alleged Detective Sergeant John Davidson, one of the lead investigators in the initial botched inquiry, received corrupt payments from the father of David Norris, who was jailed in January for the racist killing of the 18-year-old in 1993. Yesterday, Mrs. Lawrence said the Home Secretary, Theresa May, had a duty of care to expose police corruption amid claims that links between Davidson and Norris were withheld from the McPherson inquiry. She said, what came out this week has proven what we have been saying for years, because there had to be something more. I could never understand why Stephen's case was so difficult to deal with. But when you hear about the relationship between Norris's father and the police, you start to understand all of that. She added, as many people as possible need to write to the Home Secretary to tell her that this is what we want. And this report I saw was just released this past weekend. What new information has come out about the relationship between Mr. Norris's father and police officials?
Over the early years, we were getting information that there's something not quite right, and about the relationship with Norris and Norris's father. At first, we were told that because the Norris family is quite a large family, that it wasn't David Norris's father, but a relative of his. And so each time we asked the question to the police, they always said it's nothing to do with David Norris and the person that we allege to be involved in Stephen's murder. So we've always been given the wrong information. And then all of a sudden, the independent newspaper has been doing some investigation and start coming up and with all this information about, in the early days, about Davidson and the Norris family. And also during the inquiry, which happened in 1998, that the information that was given to the inquiry about the corruption, which is all around corruption, the police did not give the inquiry all the information, because I believe the information was there. And at the time, I think if you think about it, the British system was going through a turmoil. The police were being accused of institutional racism. And so if the corruption came out as well, it's like blowing the whole police force apart. And I don't think the police wanted that to happen. And so they withheld information from the inquiry. I believe that's what they did.
Wow. And you just said it, the McPherson inquiry, which was in the 90s, where they investigated the way the police handled the investigation into the murder of your son, Stephen Lawrence, and they concluded institutionally racist police department is responsible for this botched investigation, and why justice for 18 years, no one was convicted, no one in jail. They concluded institutional racism. Hearing this, it just sounds like we knew this. This is what we've been saying all these years. The police were not doing the correct thing. The police were not working in the interest of finding our son's killers. When you heard this information, did you just have a feeling of, this is what we've been saying the whole time?
Exactly. And I think each time I had meetings with either the Commissioner of Police or even with government ministers. These are the sort of things I would always put to them. And they were always in denial that the first investigation, yes, there may be some faults in that, but there was no corruption at the time. So we have no way of so how do you prove that there is some sort of corruption? And I believe, even though some things have come out, I think there's more information that we have not heard about as yet, because they talk about Davidson, but he had to have a senior officer above him. So, there's other officers who were involved. They had a supergrass who gave evidence in court, and he himself was in prison for his corruption. And so he gave information about other officers, but yet, nothing's happened about these officers. And besides, the majority of them have retired, and so they no longer are in the force. So I don't know what action could be taken against them. But I think the Truth and the Home Secretary need to have an independent inquiry into the alleged corruption that was happening during the time of my son's case.
I read a different news report, several. I mean, there have been so many reports on what happened in the recent trial, and they used the term mistakes. They said many police mistakes were made. And I just thought, I don't believe that is the most accurate term for what has happened over the years with this case. I think with the recent evidence about the corruption and the McPherson inquiry, where they concluded this is institutional racism, do you think it is most accurate to label what's happened in this case as mistakes?
Well, definitely not. I mean, so there's no mistakes. Corruption is no mistakes. An officer deliberately, where the Norris family was concerned, is not to, because they delayed in searching his house. When it was sent for him to be arrested, he was not at his home. How did he know the police were coming to arrest him? So when they arrested all the other boys that we allege who were involved in Stephen's murder, they managed to find them at home, but they did not manage to find David Norris at home. He was not there to be arrested at that time. So he would have been given information, because one of the officer who was in the corruption said that he was looking after Norris's interests. So he was looking out for David Norris, his father. So, it was not a mistake. It was definitely not a mistake.
The cows, again, our guest, Mrs. Doreen Lawrence, joining us live from the UK. I just have to repeat it. System of racism. The McPherson inquiry, they concluded institutional racism was at work here. Just during the trial, I saw that one of the now convicted white men, his mother took the stand, Mr. Norris, David Norris, his mother took the stand, and she said, the alibi, she said that he was at home the night that Stephen Lawrence was murdered. And you're supposed to be on trial, we're supposed to be telling the truth, pursuit of justice. Do you think that, Mr. Norris's mother took the stand and lied?
I definitely think she did, because in all the time that she was asked questions about her son, and at no time did she say that. I think one of the things that people need to understand, this young man was 16. He was used to having his own way and doing what he likes. Now, he wasn't in school. He didn't have a job. So there's no way a 16-year-old is going to be home by 9:30. So she wants everyone to believe that because it's a school night, which her son was not in school, that all her children had to be home by 9:30, which I don't believe that to be true. No, that is definitely not true.
System of racism. About just some of the other testimony that the defense provided, did you feel like there were other points during the trial where they were just blatantly being deceptive in order to avoid a conviction?
Well, both defendants, like Dobson's mother, his father, and a friend of theirs, all of them gave evidence in court to say that Dobson was in the house all evening. But then when the friend came to speak, all he said was he knew that Gary was in the house, but he didn't see him. But in the earlier statement, he claims he saw him. So somewhere along the line, somebody was telling a lie. And for me, sitting there listening to that was just so soul destroying, because at the same time, it's as if, as a mother, how would they like to know that their son was being killed, and somebody like me standing in court and telling so much lies, trying to protect my son when their son was murdered? And at no time did those people look me in the eye as they walked past me. They did not look me in the eye, because I looked at them, but none of them looked me in the eye to say or to show any sympathy at all to what my family has gone through in the last 18 years.
Wow. The Mr. Norris and Mr. Dobson, they were convicted and they were sentenced to 14 and 15 years respectively. And they got the sentences were this length because in the UK you have to get a sentence that is in accordance with the age of the perpetrators at the time the crime was committed. Is that accurate, Mrs. Lawrence?
Yes, that's true. But apparently the law has changed. But that law wasn't changed until 2005. And so the judge had to go with the law as it stood in 1993. And I think there's quite a few people who wrote to the Attorney General and saying that the sentence of those two was too lenient, and for him to look again at the sentencing of those two. And he came back to say that the sentences had to stand because of what the law was back in 1993. So, but then, and unless at some point that those two men have said, yes, I committed the crime, they'll have to stay in prison in a respect, they've got life. Because unless they come out and say that they were guilty, as long as they keep protesting they're innocent, they will not be allowed out. Which is, in a way, is very good for us.
Their convictions are on appeal, is that correct?
Yes, they're putting for an appeal, and the appeal that they put in is to do with, I'm not sure if you've seen the DVD that was taken of them back in, I think it was 94, of them showing how they would stab somebody and all the racial comments they made about Asian and black people. Well, part of that was shown in court during the trial, and that is what they're appealing against, because it goes to show what their behaviour was like then and what their behaviour still is now. And so that's what their appeal that they're appealing against, that video should not have been shown in court. But the Judge Stacey, I think he took great care to make sure whatever he allowed as evidence would stand up against if the individual decided to do an appeal. So we're hoping that when it goes to appeal, that it will be thrown out.
I have seen that video footage, and I would encourage any listeners, it is online. You can see video recording of these racist white men bragging about, and with glee, with joy, excitement, bragging about the thought of killing black people and other non-white people and using all sorts of foul, racist language. It is online, so you can see that. I'm just, what is the grounds of their appeal on this video and saying that it shouldn't have been allowed? Like, what is their argument for why they're saying it was incorrect for that footage to be shown?
I think what they're saying is that the video shows their behavior back in 1993, but that their behaviour has changed, that that their behaviour is not the same as it was back then. So the appeal hasn't happened as yet. They've just lodged it. So we're waiting to hear what the judge has to say about that.
Okay. I know when you were with us last year, and you've written about this as well, about the, I suspect, racist attacks against the foundation and the plaque where Mr. Lawrence was murdered, the attacks that have happened over the years. And I was going to ask, have these attacks continued? But then I looked online and I saw that, yes, they have, even as recently as the end of 2011, where vandalism has continued against the plaque. And your thoughts in the video, one of the documentaries, you talk about how you did not want your child's body to be buried in the UK because you thought it would be vandalized, and you have your son's body in Jamaica. And I saw some people saying, oh, that I can't believe Mrs. Lawrence would make a comment like that, and why would she think that, something vile as that would happen to her son's casket, his remains. And I just thought, look at what's happened to the foundation. Have there been any other attacks to the foundation and what have you since the verdict?
Not since the verdict, but I think during the trial there was some things. I'm not sure what it is. Nobody's told me exactly what it was. I think there was some sort of threat was sent to the trust. And the police had come and taken it away to take fingerprints and all various things that they take from this article. I have no idea what it is. But during that time, you'll get all racist comments about me, about my family, and where the plaque would be being attacked. And so, I still think I did the right thing, but not burying my son in this country, that his body is in Jamaica next to his great-grandmother. So, I still stand by that, because I think had he been left here, they would have found out where he's buried, and they would have desecrated his grave, and I don't think I could have coped with that.
Trifling, and just for our listeners to know, there are closed circuit cameras where the plaque is and the foundation. So I feel like if enforcement officers were really concerned about this, it shouldn't be that difficult to find out, who's doing this, to track them down. There are cameras at these sites. Is that correct?
They are cameras, and that's the reason why when any individual has attacked the plaque, that they've able to get evidence from that, and people have been charged with offences of urinating and various other things that they've done over the years, and they've taken a pickaxe and tried to damage the plaque and all sorts of things. So there's a camera now, so each time anything happens, the individual are usually tracked down and charged. And also there's cameras at the centre. But because there's always a blind spot in any part of a camera surveillance, and it seems each time that they've attacked the building, that it seems to be in the blind spot, so we can never ever see who it is who is attacking the building.
Trifling. Again, our guest, Mrs. Doreen Lawrence. Many of the reports that I've seen, people have talked about, oh, this is a celebration. So much has changed. We've made so much progress. Racism is a dying thing here in the UK, and the conviction of Dobbs and Norris is evidence of that. And again, I go back to the beginning. You said this is not a cause for celebration. We were hoping to have Olivia Ebanks on the program, but she was censored, and they prevented her from promoting her book, Almost British, where she talks about, again, institutional racism in the prison system in the United Kingdom. We had her husband instead on the program, since he is not silenced. He was on a program in August of last year, and I know that you gave an endorsement of the book. It's on the back cover of her book, Almost British. Just knowing what you know, what you've experienced, what happened to your child, when you heard about what happened to Olivia Ebanks in the UK, what were your thoughts?
I have met her, and I read the transcript of her book before it was published, and I was so shocked to know that she is a senior officer within the prison service and was treated so badly. And then the fact that she was censored, that she couldn't be told about publishing her book. You know, the truth is something that nobody likes to hear. And if somebody of her, I can say her qualification, is going through that from her senior officers, I think it's disgraceful. It is really disgraceful. And this is how this country is able to keep the truth from so many people, because they don't want, because if this was to get out, there's so many things that they have to change. Laws has been changed through Stephen's name, but it just seems to me that we still have a lot more changes to happen. So somebody like Miss Banks can actually publish her book, or even feel confident in the system that her book can be published and the truth could come out.
Institutional Racism on Display again. That book, Almost British. You can visit the archives, August of 2011. Actually, we had her husband, Rudy Ebanks. He was on the program on August 7th, which is highly significant, August 7th, 2011, because it is the day after the start of the UK riots and the death of Mark Duggan and everything that transpired after that. Just, again, racism, white supremacy, in my view, on display. What were your thoughts? Did you have any views on what happened with the riots this past summer?
Well, I think for that young man to be shot by the police, and then the report came out, is that he had a gun. And every time there's something like that, the police always somehow try to justify their action. And then eventually you get to find out that this young man didn't have a gun. He had no weapons on him whatsoever. And so I don't understand how the confrontation happened, and for the police to have shot him and then lied about it. And then the Independent Police Complaints Commission, rather than listen to the police and listen to what they're saying against the police, they automatically took the police side and so isolate the family. And when the family went to the police station trying to understand what had happened around their son and why didn't the police come and speak to them of what happened to their son, they were ignored yet again, and they were there for how many hours waiting till eventually they had to go home. And that's what kickstarted the riot. I think it was bubbling a long time, because youth they're disaffected about so many things, not having jobs, their education, poor education, the racism, the stop and search that happens with them constantly. So it's like a tin can waiting to go off. And so that's the straw that broke the camel's back. And so, once the riot had started over in North London, it just seemed to just spread right across London. I don't think there's a town in London that wasn't affected by the riot in August of last year.
Wow. I definitely wanted to ask as well, last few minutes, I read a more recent report with the trial that just happened this year and the verdict. Your former husband, Neville Lawrence, he said, he was talking to a reporter, and he said that you all still to this day have not discussed the night of Stephen Lawrence's murder. It's just something that has been too painful to talk about. And I just wanted to see, is that accurate? You all still haven't talked about that?
I suppose you could say yes. I think once Stephen had died, I think we all seemed to retreated in our little corner, and everybody grieves in different ways. And so Neville doesn't live in this country anymore. I mean, so he was over here for the trial and everything, and then he's returning back to Jamaica. So it's just me and my two children, who now have children of their own. And so at times we do talk about it, but not in the depth as we should. And one of the things that really surprised me the other day, my daughter said I have a granddaughter who's 7, and she goes to a dance class. And something had happened, and she's supposed to have said to somebody that she doesn't like white people. And since then, I presume she's been getting a lot of probably abuse from other children. So I spoke to her yesterday, and I said to her, why did you say that? Because it's not something that we talk about within our home here. Why would you say that? she knows about Stephen, and she knows that Stephen died and somebody took his life. But we've never told her who or the circumstances around that. But I think since the trial, there's been a lot of stuff on the news. And what happened is that she was able to see the news of the two men who was convicted for Stephen's murder. And that is why she said to this child who was saying something that she doesn't like white people. So I said to my daughter, she needs to, because Mia has not been back to the dance class, because she said every time she goes there, children are calling her a racist. So I said to my daughter, she needs to go to the dance class and speak to the tutors there, and for them to understand why Mia said what she did. Because all of a sudden, now she realized these was white people who killed her uncle, who she's never met. And so that's quite disturbing, because she's only 7, and for her to start thinking like that, and I don't want her growing up thinking that way. And so somehow we're going to have to try and talk to her for her to have some understanding that there's good and bad in everybody, and not everybody is the same, which is what I said to her on the phone. But we would really need to work with her so she doesn't grow up and having this, start developing this dislike or this, I don't want to call it hatred, against other people, because not everybody is bad. And this is what I wanted to understand. But from the time she knew about Steve, and then seeing these white men who now have been convicted for Stephen's murder, which has planted the seed in her head. And it's such a shame, because before she had no idea of any of this. And now her views have changed.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to get in a final question before we let you enjoy the rest of your evening. So many people that I know who dedicate time and energy to working against racism, they talk about how it's difficult, and sometimes they don't want to continue with the effort to work against racism. It just gets tiring, and it feels overwhelming, and it feels like you can't go on. And looking at what you and your entire family and people who supported you, looking at what you all have endured for 18 years, I cannot even begin to comprehend losing a child in the way that you have. Just for our listeners, for anyone who might be feeling discouraged, how do you manage to maintain the strength to continue your battle for your son, the fight for justice and against racism?
I think because I have 2 other children, and I think I'd like for them to be in a world that they can live and have some sort of happiness. And so part of my work is try and educate people about the effect of racism. And I know it is hard work, and yes, I do get despondent at times when I see things are the way in which they are. But if we all don't keep working at it, then we are no better than those who perpetrate racism. So I just feel that I need to do as much as I can in order trying to make the world, or this country anyway, a much better place for my children and my grandchildren to grow up. It's hard, but if we all give up, then how do we move on? We have to find a way of moving on. If that makes any sense to you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The book is And Still I Rise. It's available. You can get it. It is a phenomenal read. I would highly encourage listeners to pick up a copy. Mrs. Lawrence, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us again. I know it has been difficult. I wish you and your family continued strength. Continue the work that you're doing. It is incredibly important, and we will definitely be keeping an eye on the story and wishing you the best. Thank you again so much for sharing some of your evening with us.
Well, thank you, and good evening to your listeners.
Thank you. We will be in touch soon, Mrs. Lawrence. Take good care.
Okay, then. All right, okay, bye. Bye.
Mm-hmm. Wow. The C.O.W.S, our guest, joining us live from the United Kingdom, Mrs. Doreen Lawrence. Man, I will encourage listeners. should really take a moment to investigate what happened with this case. Anyone, if you're listening, if you're in the States or if you're in a different part of the world, and you don't understand or you don't believe that racism is a global problem, investigate what happened to Trayvon Lawrence. Not just the initial murder, but the way the investigation, what happened afterwards. Investigate what happened in this case. We will take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. The C.O.W.S. Context of White Supremacy will be right back after the commercial.
RacismDaily.com, your number one source for global news reports on race, racism, and overt actions of white supremacy. From Asia to the Americas, to Europe, to Australia, to Africa, racism is not a thing of the past, it is our current reality. Be informed, be globally informed. You should be the first to know. RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Do you need a one-stop shop for all of your multimedia needs? Triumphant Multimedia is a skilled team of professionals with a passion for great marketing and chic design. Our specialties include consulting, brand development, copywriting, and creative graphic design that's second to none. We also offer photography, photo retouching, videography, and video editing. At Triumphant Multimedia, our goal is to provide highly effective creative solutions built to suit any individual need or budget. Give us a call at 678-732-8067 or check us out online at trimultimedia.com.
Hi everyone, welcome. This is Justice with the C.O.W.S radio program. If you want to learn about, understand, and counter racism, white supremacy, be sure not to miss a C.O.W.S episode. We keep them jammed, packed with constructive information to sharpen your use of words to help eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy, ASAP. Also, to be able to invest in my counter-racist efforts, co-hosting the C.O.W.S radio program, please visit my blog, justdojustice.blogspot.com.
You're just saying just buckets and buckets of words.
He was lying right here. Yeah.
Tracy Martin's teenage son was shot dead on this patch of grass 10 days ago, and the gunman belonged to a neighborhood watch group.
Yeah, it must be a little, still kind of odd to be here, huh?
Yeah, it is.
17-year-old Trayvon Martin, Trey to his family, lived in Miami. He loved horses and dreamed of becoming a pilot. This high school junior was visiting relatives last month when he was shot and killed inside this gated subdivision of townhomes.
He meant the world to me. He meant the world to his mother. And it's just sad that he's been taken away from us.
Around 7 p.m. on Sunday, February 26th, Martin was walking the half-mile back from the 7-Eleven store where he had bought an iced tea and a bag of Skittles. At 7:17, 26-year-old George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch member, called police to report a suspicious person inside the subdivision. A dispatcher told Zimmerman police were on the way and to let them handle it. But just 2 minutes later, 6 neighbors dialed 911 to report a fight and then a gunshot. Trey Martin, shot once in the chest, lay dead on this walkway just 70 yards from the home where he was staying. He was unarmed.
He was just up here just to relax. And he wasn't up here to return home in a body bag. You know, and that's just the part that really tears me up.
When Trey was only 9, he pulled his father from a burning kitchen.
He was my hero, you know what I'm saying? He, my son saved my life. And for me not to be able to save his life is just, it's hard.
Sanford police have questioned Zimmerman but not charged him. He had a legal permit to carry his concealed weapon, a 9mm handgun. For now, he's a free man who maintains he acted in self-defense.
Zimmerman admitted shooting him.
Correct.
He was armed and the victim was not armed.
That's correct.
But no arrest.
No arrest.
Police Chief Bill Lee says no one saw how or why the fight began.
Is the key question whether Zimmerman acted in self-defense?
Yes.
And that's what you have yet to establish?
That's what we've yet to establish. We're trying to gather all of the information.
Tracy Martin is sure that if anyone was trying to defend himself, it was his son.
Why would he attack this guy? He don't know this guy. What are you going to attack him with, a pack of Skittles?
You understand that frustration?
Absolutely. It's their 17-year-old son. I have a 16-year-old son, and I couldn't imagine having to experience what they're experiencing.
George Zimmerman's a college student majoring in criminal justice. Neighbors and police say he has lived somewhere else since the shooting. We couldn't reach him or find any trace of him online. Tracy Martin wants Zimmerman to face a jury for killing Trey.
My kid went to the morgue, and this guy went home and went to sleep in his bed. There's no justice in that.
Context of White Supremacy. Victim of white supremacy, Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin. Many similarities between what happened with Mr. Martin as well as what happened with Stephen Lawrence, unfortunately. We have a sound clip. This is from the documentary film Stephen Lawrence, A Time for Justice. It is on the BBC. BBC, Stephen Lawrence, A Time for Justice. Lots of great information. You can access this at the BBC's website. The only problem is that you will have to pick up some skills with regards to how to reconfigure your IP address. You will not be able to access the documentary film unless you change your IP address to a UK address. It's restricted to folks who reside in the UK, so you have to figure that out. They have videos on YouTube. It's not that difficult. Obviously, if I could do it, it's not that difficult. I'm not any sort of computer wizard, but it does take a little bit of skill. But you can easily get. You can go to YouTube and just type in how to change your IP address, or UK, how to get a UK IP address, or how to access BBC videos online, and it'll tell you all how to do it. With that, as I said, I hope people have a better understanding of racism, white supremacy as a global system, global problem. Black life is simply not valued. The murder of black people is encouraged, condoned, aided worldwide in a system of white supremacy. This is why we should be dedicated to destroying this system immediately. Again, always a pleasure to hear from Mrs. Lawrence. She is an inspiration. Her diligence and perseverance is just astronomical. Remain strong, remain dedicated. Again, this is from the documentary film Stephen Lawrence, A Time for Justice, Context of White Supremacy.
Just minutes ago, amidst dramatic and emotional scenes here at the Old Bailey, Gary Dobson and David Norris have been found guilty of the murder of Stephen Lawrence.
Despite these verdicts, today is not a cause for celebration. How can I celebrate when my son lies buried? When I cannot see him or speak to him, when will I see, when I'll see him grow up and go to university or get married or have children?
Few would doubt, had it not been for the tenacity of the Lawrences, and especially Doreen, this day might never have come. But there is a private, untold story of this woman's quest for justice. This is the story of the Stephen Lawrence saga that you haven't yet heard through the eyes of his mother.
Stephen was the firstborn, and I remember when I was pregnant, I wanted to have a son, so I was more than over the moon when Stephen was born. As a baby, he had a temperament, Stephen did, That hasn't changed while he was growing up. He was determined. He knew exactly what he wanted. He was very creative. He loved drawing. He took part in all the sports that happened in school. He took part in the mini marathon back in '88.
How did he do in that?
He came 100 and something, but I think the mere fact that he finished the course was quite good.
He was almost like that annoying older brother that, as a younger brother, you could never ever sort of get to that level. As much as you tried, as much as you... It didn't matter how hard I worked, it didn't matter how hard I trained. When I thought I got to a certain place, I'd look up and he'd always move that marker another step forward.
It's hard to believe that he would have been 37. I think about him practically all the time. Would he have had a family? Where would he be in his career and stuff like that? But I still have him as being a young man.
For the British public, the Stephen Lawrence story begins in southeast London on April 22nd, 1993. The events of that evening and their aftermath would change the face of race relations in Britain. 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence and his friend Dwayne Brooks found themselves in Eltham trying to catch a bus home.
Why don't we go and see if there's a bus coming? No, I should wait here.
This was an area that had already seen 3 racist murders in as many years.
There's a bus coming. Can you see it coming?
A gang of white youths crossed the road, one of them shouting racist abuse.
I saw the first person who shouted what nigger. He hit Steve with a striking blow from up above straight down. At the time of the blow, he did scream. I've never heard anybody scream like that before.
The attack was brief, lasting only 10 seconds, long enough though to inflict 2 deadly stab wounds.
Steve, get up! Come on, Steve, let's go!
There's a terrible purity about the murder of Stephen Lawrence. The word nigger is used at the scene. And it's a sad fact that in anything else called a racist murder, people look around for other explanations. It's a defense mechanism, I think, among white people to say, oh, well, there must be some other explanation, or there must be some qualifying factors. Here, there are no qualifying factors. They attack this young man because he's black. Everything points to that.
Stephen managed to run more than 200 yards before he collapsed. This was a remarkable feat, as the knife had severed 2 of his main arteries.
Steve, get up! Steve, get up!
He died where he fell, on a cold pavement in Eltham, in a pool of his own blood, around 15 minutes after he was attacked.
People talk about the knock on the door. And that's one knock on the door that happened. We drove to the hospital. I remember as I walked in, I saw a young man in front of me. I never coming in, so he recognised Dwayne straight away. And so I rushed up to him, asking him what had happened. But he wasn't able to answer me. And straight away, I think it was a nurse, ushered us into a room and asked us to wait there. Then we were told that Stephen had died. And it's just like watching a drama. It was like, died? No, he's not. He can't be.
Within hours, 5 boys would emerge as the prime suspects and remain so for the next 18 years. They are Gary Dobson, David Norris, Neil Aycourt, his brother Jamie Aycourt and Luke Knight. Over the years, they have strutted their way through an inquest and an inquiry, whilst 3 of them, Dobson, Knight and Neil Aycourt, were acquitted of the murder in 1996. I followed the case closely for many years and in 2006 made a controversial programme for the BBC raising new concerns about police corruption and the suspects' alibis. The case had been dormant, but a fresh review was launched, resulting in the dramatic discovery of new scientific evidence. And in 2010, 2 of the 5, David Norris and Gary Dobson, were charged with murder. But under double jeopardy law, Dobson cannot be tried twice for the same crime without a special hearing at the Court of Appeal, where it must be proved the evidence is new and compelling. Our journey with Doreen Lawrence begins over a year ago in a barrister's chambers in London.
Okay, but when they're saying that, they thought that they had more on Dobson than they did on Norris.
Dobson's subject to double jeopardy, Norris isn't.
Yeah, I know, but then...
Doreen, her QC Mike Mansfield and lawyer Imran Khan are preparing for a meeting with the Met Police and the Crown Prosecution Service. With unprecedented openness, Doreen has already been told what the new evidence is.
Just to remind you, I don't know whether you've forgotten, is what they found was Stephen's blood on Dobson's collar and mitochondrial DNA linking Norris to Stephen and fibre.
But is this new forensic evidence strong enough to overcome the double jeopardy hurdle?
DNA in particular is quite a strong piece of evidence against somebody. And so when I hear that there's a link between the suspects and the victim based upon DNA, then I think that is, I could take an optimistic outlook. Doreen hasn't. No surprise, because of the years of failures and disappointments. They seem to be fairly confident, but, I had no idea.
To me, I think until the time comes when I hear the verdict where they found them guilty, I think that's the only time I'm going to be able to say, oh, well, thank God for that, and yes, I believe that will happen. And until that happens, I can't allow myself to be there. I really can't.
I think in her heart of hearts, she wants this to be a success. And I think if she doesn't get it, I can't even imagine what effect it would have on her.
There is much at stake, and not just for the family. For the Met, the Lawrence case has represented a running sore on the force's reputation.
They have invested millions of pounds, millions of person hours. They have invested everything in this. This is their attempt at redemption. And if they get it wrong, they're in for a nasty surprise.
The Met are terrified of Doreen Lawrence, aren't they?
Yes, I think most people are.
But for now, the meeting with the prosecutors has gone well.
I think we were very pleased that they were willing to have the meeting so Doreen could meet the people actually involved and get a feeling of their approach, the feelings that they have about the case, because Doreen's been there before.
The fibres and everything that they have, they're very confident, but I'm still a little bit on the fence. I think I've been there before when we've been able to say, well, we've got this and this. It's the Court of Appeal, that's going to be the test.
The court has to decide in one case whether in fact it can go back for trial because the person's already been on trial once, the double jeopardy situation. In order to do that, it has to meet a very high threshold. So obviously that's going to be the next big test.
Over the years, several dogged re-investigations have failed to crack the case. But it was the first investigation which was crucial, and it was hampered by incompetence and institutional racism from the outset. As Stephen lay dying on Wellhall Road in April 1993, officers made a series of fundamental errors and assumptions which would haunt the Met for years to come.
Where's the ambulance?
All right.
Call the ambulance, not the police.
Stephen's friend Dwayne described a racist assault, pointing out the direction their attackers had fled.
All white boys attacked us. They ran up Dixon's Road. Go after them!
But the police appeared to be focusing their suspicions on him.
I was in shock. I didn't know he had been stabbed. They were more interested in how he got those injuries. Was it me that attacked him? Did we have a fight? Or were we in a gang fight?
Initially believing Stephen had received a blow to the head, police failed to detect the real cause of the emerging pool of blood, 2 5-inch stab wounds.
Officers were as panicked as I was, and seemed to be in shock just as I was. But they were also repelled from touching him because of the blood, like I was.
2 passers-by were Connor and Louise Taff, Christians on their way home from a prayer meeting. They were with Stephen during his last moments. They told how police failed to provide any medical attention to Stephen.
There was no attempt by the officers to try and staunch the blood, staunch the bleeding?
No, there was no attempt to staunch the bleeding.
But the blood was very visible. It was.
Yes.
It's a sad thing to leave the world with so much hate directed at you. I just said, you are loved. I just wanted him to know that somebody cared.
We just tried to pray over him and said, Lord bless him and Lord heal him. I wished I had enough faith, that I could try and raise him from the dead. Sorry.
2 officers tried to take a pulse, but no first aid was administered. And by the time the paramedics arrived at 5 to 11, Stephen was already dead.
I checked all of those officers had done first aid courses. All of them had no idea what first aid was about. I said, what is the ABC of first aid? Airways, breathing and circulation. None of them knew the full ABC. They didn't even know what ABC stood for. None of them actually touched him properly at all. They didn't do any first aid at all.
There is this confused scene, and a police inspector arrives, and he would say later, takes charge. And he made a whole series of assumptions about what had happened, for which there were no grounds, and for which the Macpherson inquiry would later conclude he made those assumptions because Dwayne and Stephen were black.
The death of their son has left the Lawrences believing London is cruel and hostile. The family said they did not want Stephen laid to rest in racist soil, and his body was flown to their home country, Jamaica.
The Lawrences were never able to grieve in peace. Just days after the funeral, they received news that the Crown Prosecution Service was dropping murder charges against 2 of the suspects. But for Doreen Lawrence, that would never do, and this signalled the beginning of her long battle against the police and the judiciary. It's March 2011, and I've come to Jamaica with Doreen. I'm hoping to learn about her upbringing, which might give me an insight into what has driven this woman all these years. Doreen was born and lived in the rural highlands of Jamaica and used to play amongst the trees here. But in 1993, this quiet place took on a new significance. It's where Stephen is buried. The Lawrences keep its location a fiercely guarded secret, but Doreen has agreed to let us film here.
You can tell by the amount of years I've been coming, the amount of flowers that's been bought. It's always a very sad time. And as this picture's beginning to wear out, I think I'll have to get another one done for him. I'll get another one done.
This is a peaceful place for Doreen, a place to reflect and quietly speak to her son. But I am slightly taken aback when the anger she still feels rises to the surface.
I'm really pleased that I have buried him here, because had he been buried in the UK, his grave had been desecrated so many times, here nobody knows where he is. Then again, I think the country didn't deserve to have his body there anyway, because they took his life, so I just think they didn't deserve him, so. You know, I think it's still the best thing that we did, that we brought him here, so he can be next to his great-grandmother, so she can help look after him. I try and talk to him in my head. I just talk to him about how we are, what we're doing. I like to have that time that I can talk to him.
This is a side to Doreen Lawrence the public never get to see. Her reputation is one of an impassioned campaigner and a formidable opponent. I wanted to know how those who knew her as a child remembered her.
We're going to meet a lady called Joy who seems to know me. So I must have been very young. Hello.
I see!
Well, you remember me?
Yes!
Okay. Hello.
Ah, you're good, yes.
Joy looked after Doreen's grandfather until he died and has clear memories of a young Doreen and the childhood traits that led to her nickname, Icy.
So in Britain, a nickname like Icy would mean that you were quite tough as a child. Is that why she was called Icy?
No, I think it's something in the family tradition. All I know that I see hard-working persons.
Oh, well, I'm definitely that.
They are kind persons.
I'm definitely that.
Yes, loving.
I think I'm
yes.
that.
Ah, I think, yes, I know.
It's been a short trip, and there's just time for a final visit to Stephen's grave. Though many years have passed since his death, these moments do not get any easier.
It's like a bittersweet moment, really. You know, yes, I will have to get back home, but at the same time, it's saying goodbye to him again. And it's always again and again.
And by the time you come back here to see Stephen again, what would you hope to be telling him?
That somebody's gone to prison for his death. Somebody, hopefully. Yeah, that's what I'd like to be able to tell him.
Do you think that a positive result in this trial would give you closure?
I think where I'm concerned that he's no longer here, so that would always be there for me. But the fact that somebody's been held to account and they've gone to prison for him, that would be the closure that I'm looking for.
Doreen knows she must put the tranquility of Jamaica behind her and prepare for what awaits over the coming months. The countdown to one of the most eagerly anticipated murder trials in recent history has begun. In 1993, Gary Dobson and David Norris were part of the gang of 5 who have always been the prime suspects for this murder. Led by Neil, the eldest of the Acourt brothers, the gang had a fearsome reputation for carrying and using knives. Dobson was more of a follower, if perhaps brighter than the others. Norris was a different story. Aged just 16, he was the violent son of a drug-dealing gangster. Within 48 hours of Stephen's murder, the police received no fewer than 26 tip-offs, mostly naming the same group of boys.
All know to use and carry knives openly. One was seen in the area of stabbing. The boys who did the murder, there are 5 of them. They're nuts. Fine killer if you arrest them. Were involved in a stabbing when you arrest them. All know they call themselves the Craze. Knives openly. One was seen in the area of stabbing.
Despite this, no arrests were made. Not even when a police surveillance team watched Jamie Acorn leave his house carrying a bin liner potentially full of evidence, get into a car and drive away.
The police wasn't interested in Stephen. They weren't interested in catching his killers at all. They assumed that Stephen must know his killers, that we must be into crime, and so was Stephen. And suggesting that, they found a glove on Stephen, as if to say he was into crime. It's like they're assuming that all black families are criminals.
Spring 2011. It's a double jeopardy hearing at the High Court. Only Gary Dobson is subject to these proceedings, since David Norris has never stood trial for Stephen's murder. Everything hinges on this hearing. If the CPS cannot persuade the 3 judges the new evidence meets the legal threshold, there will be no trial at all. Doreen and Imran are preparing for court.
We're second day into being at the High Court.
Once the witnesses are done, the lawyers are going to make submissions to the court as to whether the acquittal should be overturned or not. So once that's all heard, submissions made, then we wait.
So if we get through and the judges say, well, yes, we can go to trial, then it's a much stronger possibility. But at the same time, I'm still a little bit cautious. So I'm not going to be saying, oh yeah, whoopee. I just think this is fantastic. We are going to get there.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Take it. Another day.
Prosecutors believe they've found the evidence proving Gary Dobson was part of the group of boys who attacked Stephen Lawrence. They claim that at some point during the attack, possibly as the knife was drawn back for a second strike, a tiny spot of Stephen's blood became airborne. And it was this microscopic blob measuring less than 0.5 millimetre which eventually landed on the collar of Dobson's jacket and crucially soaked into the weave. New advances in DNA technology enabled scientists to prove it was Stephen's, with odds of 1 billion to 1 that it belonged to anybody else. Clothes fibres belonging to Stephen were also found, but it was this minute bloodstain that would form the central plank of the prosecution case.
There were fibres that had already been found, and they'd been found way back in 1995 and 1993. We also followed a line of hair, human hair. There appeared to be quite a considerable amount of human hair. And as a result of that, they realised that there was a potential for blood as well. And that, at that moment, I think it became very significant what we'd found.
But the defence has an explanation for all of this. Contamination. They say that dried blood fragments and fibres from Stephen's blood-stained clothes must have escaped through degenerated seals throughout years of scientific testing. This claim is bolstered by a litany of examples of poor evidence handling, when various key exhibits have been stored or even photographed together. Dobson's team insist this fatally undermines the prosecution evidence and that it doesn't deserve to go before a jury. But for Doreen and Imran, it's the first they've heard of it.
The arrest, all the information, didn't collect the evidence, so it's just a catalogue of stuff, and like listening to it now, nothing much has changed.
When I heard it, I was shocked, and it's staggering that if you wanted to pick any case that Metropolitan Police wanted to make sure that they had dealt with properly after all the criticisms, it would be this one. Yet despite that, things were not being kept properly. I mean, what's concerning me now is that I can hear, if this goes to trial, how the defence are going to make hay with this. And they're going to suggest to the jury, you can't trust this. Putting legal hat on, looking at it, hopefully objectively, you'd say, yeah, they've got over that threshold. And I want to be able to say to you, I hope I can say to you, I was right.
Okay, well, I hope so too. Only time will tell.
It's Good Friday. It's also the anniversary of Stephen's death. And whilst the family waits for the judge's decision, Stuart Lawrence addresses a special memorial service to his brother.
I'd just like to share with you some really good memories that we both shared, me and Stephen, every Sunday. As far back as I can remember, we used to come to this church, and I can look around and I can see memories. Because it just reminds me.
In the early days, I did after Stephen's death. As I say, I questioned why wasn't God there to protect Stephen, and I had really difficulty in that in the early days.
And I'd just like to say I'm really grateful for all the help and support you've given my family over all these years as well, especially my mum.
And then I presume I start thinking that everything happens for a reason, and I think all the things that's happened around since Stephen's death, even though he had such a cruel death, it's like it was meant to be, because all the changes that's happened, and hadn't Stephen died, a lot of things would never have happened. That's the things I start thinking about whenever I'm here. People say to me, well, you know how strong you are. I don't think I'm strong. I don't think I'm strong at all. I just think, you know, there's something there carrying me and helping me through. So I'm not doing it on my own. If there's one thing I must say, I don't forgive the boys who've killed Stephen. They took away Stephen's life. And there's nothing in them, in their behaviour or anything to show that they regret what their actions have done and the pain that it's caused us as a family.
Today the judges deliver their decision, and the Lawrences learn if Gary Dobson will stand trial for Stephen's murder alongside David Norris.
Just want to get today over with, and then we can evaluate from there, so to speak. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard.
I'm not sure both individuals are going to be in court today. I suppose I'm just looking forward to seeing what they look like now, because in the past, say 10 years or so, I've not seen. So, and everybody's grown up and got a bit older. Steve was never allowed to get older. They just got on with their life as if to say nothing's happened. And it's like, yeah, you know, you thought you got away with it. With a bit of luck, you know, when the judgment comes out today, we'll say, yeah, we've got you. Well, not quite, but we're on the road.
At 10 o'clock this morning, we go into court for, and we get judgment, decision. The prosecution are allowed to tell the family and myself an hour before what that decision is going to be. So we'll know an hour before. So we'll go into court knowing the decision. If it's a good decision, that'll be an hour on cloud nine. If it's a bad decision, then that hour is going to be a very painful hour.
the result Doreen's been waiting for. The new evidence is strong enough to go in front of a jury. Gary Dobson and David Norris will stand trial.
It's been a long time in coming, but we still have a long way to go. And so at this moment in time, all I can think about is Stephen. And that perhaps somewhere down the line we will finally get justice for him. Because I think it's just been a long time for us to get to this position. And that's all I wanted to say. Even though you hear all of it, but is it real? Is it real? You know, after 18 years, are we actually going to have a trial where the CPS are, you know, all gun-ho to say, yes, we want to make something happen?
It's a bit surreal, really. You know, you're not... Is this really happening? Is this some sort of dream? You know, is this going to be the start of a big hope that ends in disappointment?
There will be a trial.
It's 18 years too late, isn't it, the trial?
Yeah.
The worry is now, having heard some of the evidence, which is fine for this stage, is it enough for a trial?
Doreen is no stranger to overcoming obstacles. From the beginning, she found herself up against an establishment that didn't want to listen. Within just 48 hours of Stephen's murder, there were already strong grounds for arrest. But it took an intervention from the world's #1 humanitarian, Nelson Mandela, before the police finally moved.
If a black person had committed a murder, they would have arrested him by now. But because it's a black and it's white, it seems as if they're condoning what these people are doing, because they're not showing to us that they are out there doing their job and arresting people.
Next day, despite no significant new evidence, police started arresting the suspects, including Dobson and Norris. But during interviews, the boys, who were all aged just 16 and 17, gave little away.
Can you give me your full name, please? Neil Charles Acolt. Do you agree that the tapes were unsealed in your presence? You told me I ain't got to say nothing, and I don't want to say nothing yet. We're investigating...
A vast array of weapons was seized from the houses, but none could be proved to be the knife used in the attack.
No comment. RC22, it's a tiger lock knife. No comment. Exhibit RC21 is a Gurkha type knife. RC25. No comment. This is a sword in a scabbard found.
David Norris also remained tight-lipped.
Are you going to tell us where you were that night?
No reply.
Do you remember that night?
No reply.
Gary Dobson, on the other hand, was much more talkative.
Where did you want me to start? From what time?
As well he might be. Dobson had some explaining to do. He'd already told police during their house-to-house inquiries he stayed home all night. But by the time of this interview, the police knew otherwise.
Here you are, bro.
A local youth had heard about the stabbing, put 2 and 2 together, and turned up at the A-Court's house an hour after the murder.
Look, there's been a stabbing down Wellow. Yeah. You boys don't know nothing about it? Why should we? Well, that's was it.
This witness would later claim he saw Dobson, Norris and the A-Courts cleaning themselves up and acting suspiciously.
Alright, well look, I'm just saying, yeah, he's dead. So now you told us.
Word got out this boy had spoken to the police about what he'd seen. Dobson changed his story.
You stayed indoors all that night? No, I popped out at 11:45, that's 11:45, ran to a friend's house to get a CD, and then came straight back. I was only out for 10, 15.
Then Dobson repeatedly lied about knowing David Norris.
Why did you not tell us you knew Norris? What's the cover up with Norris? I don't know Norris. I know of a David Norris. I don't know a David Norris. He's the madman with a knife at the moment. I know of a David Norris.
But unknown to Dobson, he'd been photographed with Norris outside the A-Court's house just a week before. Many items of clothing had been seized, including a jacket from Dobson and a pair of jeans from Norris's room, but they would yield no useful forensic evidence, for now. By the summer of 1993, the case ground to a halt. Today, Doreen's full-time job is keeping Stephen's case in the public eye. In a lasting memorial, she helped set up and is a director of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust in Greenwich, a purpose-built centre which trains and funds budding architects.
Tonight's about celebrating the life of Stephen Lawrence. And
Doreen hates the limelight, but never shirks from being the public face of the campaign.
We're really honoured to really be part of the story, really, with Doreen and Neville and the family.
Doreen and Neville divorced in 1999. Events like these are amongst the only times they meet.
But these balloons are balloons that have Stephen's name and his signature on them. And we're going to invite the family first to release their balloons. God bless you, Stephen. Ladies and gentlemen, let's host Stephen Lawrence. May his name rise and rise and rise.
We're here to look back at what's happened since his death and to look forward to the future and the work of the Trust. What I'm most proud of is having this magnificent building and the work that takes place in it. Working hard to make Stephen Lawrence a name and all the achievement to be a lasting legacy for years to come.
If it was me and I lost a loved one, I don't know whether I'd be able to go out there and say the things that she does, do things she does, put a brave face on, a smile on, and meet hundreds of people, and all she wants to do is to stick her head under the pillow and just grieve. And I have great respect for that, huge admiration. I can carry on with my job. I've got other cases. This is her life, and I'm so in awe of the fact that she can continue the way that she does.
At some point, I'd love to be able to say bye-bye and to see the Trust can support itself. It is hard because I am just a regular mum, you know, who's lost a son and have campaigned. And I think if from the word go had the police caught his killers and did what they needed, nobody would ever hear from me or even know who I am. Been divorced now for the past 11 years. I think we'll have to be married. I don't know, probably not. I think things were probably going wrong before Stephen's death. I've got nobody in my life since then. You know, you can be out with loads of people and you're still on your own.
After the failure of the first investigation in 1993, the family intensified the pressure on the Met and a fresh inquiry was launched the following year. This time, detectives set about their task with vigour and installed a tiny camera in a plug socket of Gary Dobson's flat. The surveillance footage showed Dobson, pictured here with a large knife, Norris, and others at play and in their element. The results were shocking.
There's a nigger there who like me rubbish years ago. And I was standing there like my pocket, pulled it out, I picked the thing off, and I went, that'll do there, Mick, before I end up cutting it off. I'm taking my skin of black line, torture him, set him alive. I throw their 2 legs and arms on the same body. I let him squirm with the floor and keep rolling, kick the towel and around like that.
They behave in a way which, as evidence of racism, is shocking almost beyond belief, certainly almost beyond bearing.
You brother little where they informed a few weeks ago.
The film shows Neil Acortt with a knife virtually all the time. As he is talking, he's waving the knife around, He's making stabbing movements in the air. He's making a sort of strange bowling movement with the knife in a very sinister way. He replicates the way in which Stephen Lawrence was attacked.
It's evidence of virulent racism and a violent obsession with knives, but not evidence of murder. The investigation stalled again. The Lawrences, frustrated at yet another failure, took matters into their own hands, and in 1996 brought a private prosecution.
The parents of Stephen Lawrence arrive at the Old Bailey for the start of the trial.
Charges were laid against Gary Dobson, Luke Knight and Neil Acorte, but the case rested heavily on Dwayne Brooks, who had picked out Acorte and Knight in an ID parade. But his evidence was deemed inadmissible, and before the jury got to see the police surveillance video, the case fell apart.
I don't think what happened today is fair at all. As you can see, my wife is not here today, so you can just judge how she feels.
I remember collapsing when I went home. They'd get a doctor to see me. And I think that's probably one of the first time I've actually saw a doctor since Stephen's death, because I think I've been holding myself for so long that keeping myself going, and I think that was probably the last straw, and it affected me quite badly.
3 of the principal suspects, including Dobson, walked free from court, and because of the way the law stood at the time, they believed they could never be tried again. In a storeroom at the back of the trust, Doreen is taking me through a box of Stephen's belongings.
Who's that? He's an artist, and he was the one who...
I can see that despite the public profile she craves for Stephen's legacy, Doreen guards closely her private memories of him.
Oh, these are just some pictures that of him as he grew up. I didn't like the idea of too many photos of Stephen being out. I just think that everybody just seems to want to have photos of him, and I just think no. The one is enough, then that way you have some control. This is when he was a cub and a scout. So he got his cap still. This is when he was a cub. So he got his jumper, baton, and all his badges. And so he's got his bronze and silver badge, so he didn't quite get his gold. And this is just his work. And then when I look at the date of when he did that, he did it on the 7th of April, 15 days before he died. And he did that.
When you say you can't read it?
No, I can't read it, no.
Why not?
I don't know, I find it difficult. Because when I look at, what he could achieve and see his work here, I'm not ready to read this yet. Not ready to read this yet. In the early days, I know there was days when I'd lock myself in my room, I didn't come out, and that was really a dark place. And I know once you're in there, it's very difficult to take yourself back out, and I'm always worried about allowing myself to go back there.
With just 2 months until the trial, Doreen's decided to have a family barbecue. It's a rare opportunity to see her and Stuart relaxing.
It's just a good way to get the family together, to spend some time together, socialising, less stressful times and stuff. And I hope there's a positive outcome, just because, more for my mum's sake than myself, because then it will help her put this to rest and her to move on. I think that's the most important thing for me, really.
What have you got there to give your old auntie, darling? Chicken's ready, sausages are ready.
Doreen's sister Cheryl has been a crucial pillar of support throughout the years.
She didn't ask for this. This is not the life she planned for herself. But I think from the 22nd of April 1993, her world became dark. And I'm hoping by the end of the year there will be a light. what we need is justice. I don't think she'll stop until she hears guilty.
And it was the Lawrence family's relentless search for answers which eventually forced a full public inquiry in 1998.
Doreen Lawrence, Stephen's mother, has been highly critical of the police investigation into her son's death. Today she heard evidence...
The Macpherson inquiry would become the watershed moment in British race relations history.
Sir Paul Condon arrived for a furious battle of wills over just how racist his force is.
It exposed the Met, and in particular its first investigation into Stephen's murder, as institutionally racist.
And I think she went through the inquiry almost saying, I told you so, I told you so. Look, this is what was happening, and I knew it all along.
The crucial thing about the institutional racism is that there was a collective failure of the police, as we called it, a collective failure. Almost every decision that should have been made didn't get made. If it did get made, there weren't records of it. And if there were records of it, the decisions were wrong.
Amongst 70 recommendations made by the inquiry, Sir William Macpherson called for a complete overhaul of police training and, crucially, a change in the double jeopardy law, which eventually led to the current prosecution. But the inquiry would be remembered as much for its damning verdict of the Met as it would for the scenes outside after the 5 suspects had finished their evidence and revealed very little once again.
They were just laughing in our faces that they knew that was it. You know, they got away with murder. People just had enough of them, was pelting them with all sorts of fruit bottles and all sorts of things thrown at them. But they came across as exactly the type of person that they are. Evil, just came across just like that.
It's the first day of the trial, the day she's been waiting for 18 years, and I had, perhaps naively, expected Doreen and Stuart to be more upbeat.
I'm just numb at the moment. The media attention is going to be even more intense than ever. I don't know, it's like something new. You know, it may be going on for 18 years, but it's still something new. Listening to the news this morning, you know, it's so clinical that how the reporters, how they talk about it is just a matter of fact. It's a statement. It's emotional involvement for me. Most of the stuff is resting on contamination.
What the prosecution is saying to us is that they're ready for all of that. They've got answers for all of it. I mean, dare I say, if we meet here 5 weeks' time, I think you'll have a conviction, Doreen.
What do they say? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. So until that actually happens, nobody can be certain.
You ready?
If there's such a thing as being ready. Well, just put one foot in front of the other, really, as I've been doing for the past 18 years, really.
In the following weeks, the Lawrences would hear testimony from dozens of police and forensic witnesses. And for the first time, the case against David Norris was revealed.
On a sweatshirt that was found in his bedroom of his address during the original search of his house, there were 6 fibres that matched Stephen's trousers, and also a fibre that matched Stephen's polo shirt. And on his jeans, there was found amongst the debris on the surface 2 very, very small fragments of hair, and a mitochondrial DNA profile of that hair matches Stephen Lawrence and his maternal relatives.
Norris would tell the jury the garments didn't belong to him, whilst Dobson said he hadn't worn the key jacket for years before the murder. and Dobson's defence mounted a stinging attack on the principal piece of evidence, the bloodstain on the jacket collar. They claim that one of these dried blood fragments from Stephen found their way onto Dobson's jacket through cross-contamination. When scientists tested the jacket for traces of saliva, they sprayed it with water before covering it with a paper sheet and weights to squeeze them together. It's during this process, they say, that one of Stephen's blood flakes became liquid again and soaked into the fabric. The defence didn't offer any scientific experts of their own, but the lead prosecution scientist carried out a series of tests to see if this saliva examination could indeed explain the bloodstain.
During our experimentation, we were never able to replicate the stain on the collar using dried flakes of blood from Stephen Lawrence or from the blood from the packaging. The nature and appearance of that stain indicated that it was a result of wet blood landing on that garment, and it was not the result of the testing that had been conducted subsequently on the item.
So one of the explanations for the stain was that the wearer of that jacket was at the scene of the attack.
Yes.
But the jury was told how a comprehensive police review of the handling of each exhibit over the past 18 years exposed a series of contamination blunders.
Given that this is one of the most high-profile unsolved murders in Britain, never mind in the Met, wouldn't the Lawrences be entitled to expect that these exhibits would have been better looked after?
Yes. I think that there were things that I wish were better, but they didn't affect the evidence that we've placed before the court. I am not a scientist, so I go to scientists, and had they have said to me, well, that is a disaster, then I would have, my heart would have sank. But at no stage did we get that.
4 weeks into the trial, after intense legal debate, a jury was shown the police surveillance video for the very first time, 17 years after it was recorded.
I'm telling you, I'm taking one skin the black alive. She torture and set him alive.
Both defendants took to the stand to denounce their extreme racism and proclaim their innocence. Alibis were offered. Stephen and Pauline Dobson swore their son was at home at the time of the murder, as did Norris's mother. The defendant's fate is now in the hands of the jury, which, after 6 weeks of evidence, is sent out to consider its verdict.
After deliberating for more than 8.5 hours, the jury has finally returned its verdict. Gary Dobson and David Norris have been found guilty of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. They now face prison. For the Lawrences, after a wait of more than 18 years, justice has finally been delivered.
In her only post-verdict television interview, Doreen told me of her relief.
Just so numb. I think when we were told that the jury's the verdict was in, it's just all of a sudden you just start to feel, gosh, panic. Whereas it before, even though I was sort of really holding myself, it just seems to have just got even tighter still. So when they said that, you just feel something inside like snap, just said thank God. And then when it's both of them, that's even more.
And you were very emotional in court. Was it like an outpouring of 18 years of
grief? I don't know. I think some part of that, I just feel that, it's just releasing some of the stress and strain that's been happening over there, has been built up for the past 18 years. It's not all out, because I just think I'm still, am I going to keep pinching myself to say that they've actually been found guilty? I think it'll take a little while to sink in. At some sort of justice, I want people to think.
For Doreen Lawrence, this verdict may represent a chance for closure. But for the Met and for Britain, the legacy of Stephen Lawrence will endure.
This case is an extraordinary case which has had more impact on policing than any other single case that I can think of. in modern times and possibly in the history of the Met. The way we approach homicide investigations is utterly changed. The way we approach working with families and with communities is completely changed. The face of the Met has changed.
I meet many people in my work, and the one thing they all say is what a fantastic job the Lawrences have done. And that's white people as well as black people. It's not necessarily just about black and white, it's about whatever background you're from. It means that you can't get away with doing the things that you did before.
Even after all this time, the name of Stephen Lawrence is instantly recognised, and even among people who weren't alive when he was killed. The name alone is a key to a whole series of issues and thoughts, positive ideas about Britain and race. If that's Stephen Lawrence's legacy, it's a very fine one. We should be very grateful to him.
Okay, Stephen's name going to go down in history for all sorts of things, and I just think, okay, that's a positive, but I'd rather have my son here than having his name attached to a legacy.
Gary Dobson and David Norris are now convicted of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. The other 3 original suspects continue to deny the murder. Luke Knight, Jamie Acorte and Neil Acorte remain free. The case remains open.
Context of White Supremacy. Again, that is from the documentary film Stephen Lawrence, A Time for Justice. Stephen Lawrence, A Time for Justice. It's on the BBC. You can go to their website and you can check it out. Actually, as I said, I was telling folks in the chat room, you can view this documentary online, but it will take some work. It's a part, they have a series, I think it's called BBC, iBBC, and you can see these documentaries in full, great quality online, but the only thing is that your IP address you have to have a UK IP address for folks if you know a little bit more about internet service. If you don't have a UK IP address, which you will not, if you do not reside in the area of the world known as the UK, you will have to do some tricks with your browser to change that so that you can access the material. Obviously, it can be done. It just takes a little bit of work. They do have videos on YouTube that will explain how you can reconfigure your browser to view this material and other content that is restricted online. Excellent film, as I said in the chat room, though. A white person did put this film together, and that is kind of tough to watch a white person doing the interviewing and being on camera and talking to Mrs. Lawrence and going over everything. I think the scene where he follows her to Jamaica, where she's at the gravesite of her son, and he's saying, you know, it surprised me that she's still angry. Some of the anger comes to the surface when she was talking about not having her child buried in the UK because she just knows that white people would have desecrated the gravesite the same way that they have desecrated repeatedly the foundation as well as the plaque. There's a plaque at the site where he died, bled to death, on the middle of the sidewalk next to the gutter, really. But there's a plaque there, and as she stated on the program, they urinated on it, broken glass on it, painted it, just trifling behavior on the part of white people to be expected. Before we wrap things up, unless there's anyone on the line that has anything they want to get in before we wrap things up, I wanted to share two comments from listeners. One comment, Mrs. Lawrence, she talked about her granddaughter who's 7, who didn't know very much about what happened to Stephen Lawrence. This would be her granddaughter's uncle. And she said that her granddaughter, when she got some of the information about what happened to her uncle Stephen Lawrence, that she said she hated or she did not like white people. And one of the people wrote in, listener, she said, Mrs. Lawrence's granddaughter should be highly suspicious of all white people. We could replace the global system of white supremacy with justice a lot sooner if adults would be honest with their children. Amen. Second comment from a listener, also in the UK area. We have, for a long time, we've had really strong listenership out of folks from the UK. This listener, he was listening yesterday when Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. and Cleo Manago were on the broadcast, and he wanted to share this. I think he actually wanted to share it on the program, but he didn't have the ability to dial in. But he wrote in, he said, number one, please excuse any errors. He said he was typing quickly, but he wrote, I thank the Creator for bringing Mr. Cleo Manago back to the cows so soon, and here's why. I am a black Zimbabwean male born after our attainment of political independence in 1980. Correct me if I am wrong, but I think I heard Mr. Manago say that President Robert Mugabe is opposed to anti-sexual, homosexual behavior because he is a Catholic. He did indeed say that. If that's so, I am extremely disappointed. But Mr. Manago is a victim. So as Mr. Fuller says, he has a right to exercise BGQ. But I'm still deeply disappointed, and as a Zimbabwean, I feel very insulted because it's bad enough that the racists called our noble ancestors savages as a pretext to their barbaric, enslaving mission called colonialism, or they call civilization. Now back to Mr. Manago. He's a victim of racism. Who are so-called same-gender loving people? Who are they attempting to distort African cultural values and confuse victims, all in the name of trying to get us to accept this agenda? I think it's important that for victims to understand that Africans, Zimbabweans specifically, embrace and continue to embrace Christianity because the moral principles espoused by this religion mirror our own cultural values that existed before white people, missionaries, set foot on the continent. Our culture is very sexually conservative. How conservative in the cultural context that oral sex is considered radical. We are not carnally minded in the Zimbabwean tradition. According to the elders, sex is not fun and games. It has two main purposes: procreation and bringing people together. The truth of the matter is that many Zimbabweans disagree with our political leadership on a lot of issues, but rejection of anti-sexual, homosexual behavior is almost unanimous because it is the antithesis to our family-centered culture. By the way, Mr. Manago, sir, if you are sure that what you are doing is right or constructive, why? Do you need the poor and ignorant, put that in quote, well, he has it in quotes, poor and ignorant, in quotes, African masses stamp of approval to carry on? Something is wrong here. When has the world ever needed Africa's opinion on anything? Question. Please ask Mr. Manago if he has ever been to Zimbabwe. I would be interested to hear his response. He says he's highlighting the cultural context because outside that context, our society's values have been vastly compromised by bastardizing alien forces. Listener in the UK, but he says he is a loyal Zimbabwean. We will hopefully get an opportunity to have him on the program live so he can present his views. Maybe we can even have Mr. Manago back on the program so he can ask his question directly to Cleo Manago. At any rate, I have two comments. I don't see any hands on the Free HD line. We will be back later in the week. Just check the TalkShoe site. The programs will be scheduled and you'll know what's going down. You can also check the Facebook page. I'll update as soon as we get dates and times for upcoming broadcasts, hopefully more constructive information. You can visit Justice's website, justdojusticetoday.blogspot.com. justdojusticetoday.blogspot.com. I will again encourage folks, check out information on what happened with Stephen Lawrence. Not an isolated incident. This sort of thing happens worldwide all the time. Total disregard for the lives of black and non-white people every day. Every day. Just want to read a passage. This is from Mrs. Lawrence's book, And Still I Rise, where she documents what happened with her son and how she's dealt with it over the years. Excellent material. One of the most important passages, I think, in the book that really gives you this is white people. This is why, in my opinion, why her granddaughter said what she said. This is just a few days after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And she writes, "The next thing I remember is a shout of fucking nigger. I was too upset to do anything about it. But my sisters and cousin walked over and confronted the racist suspect white woman who had shouted, and they were called black cunts in return. Cheryl, who is Mrs. Lawrence's sister, said, 'It was bastards like you that killed my nephew.' The white woman then said, 'If he hadn't been in this country, he'd still be alive.' The white woman then grabbed a brick out of the boot of her car and threatened Cheryl with it. It was a terrible introduction to the outside world." Again, this is just days after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. White people. White people. We will be back, as I said, a little later in the week. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. Share the broadcast if you think it would be constructive. I definitely think it's always great to hear from non-white people in different parts of the world so we can corroborate and understand better the global system of white supremacy. Voltron is in effect worldwide. UK, Miami, East Bay, South Korea, worldwide system of Voltron. We will be back later in the week. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thank you all for tuning in.